Hello, Realtors. Byron King, South Carolina Association of Realtors. This is the legal podcast. Thanks to Mike and Tila that are on the board in the back. This is a long, deep dive into the SCR 130 buyer agency agreement. If you want a short form, Tierra Pitts has done the walkthrough on Form 130. See our YouTube channel for that. But what I'm excited about today is I got a special guest, a practitioner, an instructor, a past president, Reah Smith. Reah, introduce yourself to the Realtors, please.
Byron, glad to be here. I'm Reah Smith. I'm with Lake Huey Real Estate. I'm a longtime practitioner. I think this is year number 16 for me. I am a past president of the state association. I served during everyone's favorite year in the industry, which was 2024. That was the year that we had all of our NAR settlement changes. Many of y'all probably joined in with me on one of the 17 town halls that we hosted at that time. As I hosted and presented on those town halls, it became a natural progression for me to become a real estate instructor. So I'm now teaching continuing education and enjoying that process, writing coursework as well. And I'm the 2025 Realtor of the Year, proud to be.
Congratulations. Thank you for all the help during that year. I learned a lot from your classes. And I'm looking forward to your classes that we'll talk about later that are coming up, learning even more. Because lawyers, we know the lawyer stuff, but we learn a lot from the people that actually use these forms. So I appreciate that. If you have any questions, you can contact the legal hotline at 803-772-5206. So I guess, Reah, we'll just kind of jump right in. So This is the exclusive right to buy, buyer lease, buyer agency agreement. It's 130. We've got one 135 that's very similar, but this is the one that on the hotline we get the most people are using this exclusive right. So we'll go through this form, kind of a deep dive on it.
Yeah, I would call this the common form that most practitioners are using to facilitate buyer agency services. We've got another short video on the 110 disclosure of brokerage relationship form. I have it stacked on top of my copy of the buyer agency agreement because you better have that substantive contact discussion on agency before you get into the buyer agency form. So that's just your reminder point here. One thing I want members and licensees to notice is your disclosure of brokerage relationships form is 3 pages. The buyer agency agreement is 3 pages plus a signature page, so only 4. So they shouldn't intimidate you from a discussion point with members of the public on either point, the meaningful discussion on agency and also what buyer agency services look like. So as we're kind of coming through the form, the important thing that I feel like members and licensees need to understand that maybe we taught a little differently leading up to the pre-settlement and the pre-settlement practice days. Purpose of agency, we used to sort of instruct it that, get them locked down into an agency agreement for the longest term that you can on the widest scope of services that you offer, because you want them to be loyal to you. You want that L in the old car. You want that loyalty from the member of the public that's becoming your client. Practically, that's not a great practice mode. In today's market conditions and the intent of this form, you need to be more specific on Section 2 about your purpose of agency. What is your purpose of agency? Take the Goldilocks mentality of just right. What services are you offering? What area of your marketplace are you serving, and you're going to work with this client on in this client level relationship, and define it very well in this second section, purpose of agency, section number 2 on page 1 of the contract. From there, a major change that I think stumbled some licensees, but it was very important. If you notice section 3, length of agreement, do you know what we used to have there? A start date. There's no start date there anymore. There's just an automatic termination date on date firm. Well, why was that changed? So that licensees and members do not post-date this agency agreement or backdate it is what was commonly happening, where a member goes out and shows houses without any documentation. That's a problem with 4057, your license law. It is also an extreme problem with the NAR settlement requirements that we now as members all operate under. So there's no start time on that. It begins when you sign this document. That's a change that came out in 2024, but I think it's been a slow understanding from members that is the way that this term is written. You of course have your important consent pieces on did they receive their 110 disclosure brokerage relationship form, they're going to acknowledge if they're willing to consider the agency relationships of dual and designated. They do that up front, of course, and we'll talk a little bit about that further into the forms discussion here. Page 2 is your important page. This is your broker fee for service. Now, what I feel like is taking place in the market is buyer agents that are uncomfortable with their fees, that are not confident in speaking for their fee for service and what that percentage amount, flat fee amount is, whatever that amount is. They're accustomed in the mindset of the old way, pre-2024, where we had offers of compensation in the MLS. We had broker-to-broker compensation as the only practice nearly. There may have been some other outliers, but that was your common practice. They're still in that mindset, and I'm afraid that some of our members and some licensees may be leaving that section blank and waiting until they may discover more about what the fee situation would be. Byron, can you elaborate on why that is a problem to leave that fee for service blank? What issues are created with that, with license law and with the settlement?
Yeah, so it's an agreement. So, from the lawyer point of view, to have an agreement, you have to have all the material terms. So arguably, you might not even have an agreement. So this is to protect the realtor and the buyer. And so if you left that blank and then the buyer went and bought a house from somebody else, and you tried to sue me, say I'm the villain buyer that did that, my defense attorney could say, well, your broker never put a material term in there, so you can't sue us, case dismissed. The other thing is the settlement. We're anticipating some of these trial lawyers may be using testers. And if they catch you not using these forms correctly, that can remove the settlement protection from you and from your broker in charge and from your entire brokerage. So always important for brokers in charge to train your agents to use these forms correctly. And if you have any questions, contact the hotline, attend one of your classes that we'll talk about a little bit later. But you want to make sure all the material terms are in here. So broker fee is a material term, and so I would always recommend that you put your broker fee in there, and we'll talk about how that can change or not change a little bit later on, but my recommendation would be to put your fee in there.
Well, I like how you described that it's arguably that you don't have an agreement if you leave that blank. I guess along that same line of thought, it's arguable that you agreed to work for no fee. Exactly. If you've left that blank. It's important that upfront you speak your value to the member of the public that's a customer becoming your client of my fee for service, the value that I bring to this transaction to facilitate you to the closing table, Mr. Buyer, is X. And you agree upon it up front, and then you make your plans from there. Well, what is the normal pushback or fear or objections that you may handle as a licensee serving the public in this situation? I don't have money to pay you, Mr. Buyer Agent. I'm going to have to bring my money from financing. How are we going to work this out? I agree. I believe you're worth your fee for service, and I can't materialize money out of thin air to make it happen. What are my options to ensure that you get paid? This is handled clearly in this form, and I think that members and licensees overlook that you have options at the very bottom of page 2. Bold, uppercase lettering here, credit to buyer at closing. Buyer may choose to negotiate that fee be paid in whole or part by the seller through a seller credit at closing. At buyer's instructions, buyer will make this request and the buyer's offer to purchase the property. This is your opportunity to explain to that buyer the ways in which that you will seek your fee for service through the terms of the transaction. That should allay some fear in signing a document like this. The second acknowledgement here directs seller to buyer broker compensation. You got 2 checkbox options here. Buyer does or does not authorize the broker to request that broker fee be paid. You're asking them to give you the permission to seek that fee using the funds that they bring to the transaction to satisfy their obligation to the fee that you are collecting on the behalf of working for them. They're giving you permission to do that. Those 2 key points at the bottom of page 2 need to be expressed very clearly to the member of public so they understand, number 1, they have an obligation to that fee. Number 2, these are the tools that we have to secure that fee. In the transaction, money comes from one direction to solve everybody's obligations. We don't have any problems in real estate, right? We only have obligations. Seller has obligations to their fees. Buyer has obligations to their fees. And that's beyond just commission fees, beyond fees for service. There are due diligence fees that need to be settled. Seller may have mortgage that needs to be paid off, or even considering the taxes, et cetera. One pot of money is coming to solve everybody's obligations in the situation. So that buyer has to understand that your fee at the rate of X, whatever it may be, percent, flat fee, whatever it may be, that obligation is theirs. And at the bottom of page 2, they understand this is where they can pull the in black and white written information of how I'm going to do this for you, so they're not terrified that they're going to owe at the end. It's important that the buyer understand that you're working on contingency. When this document is signed, at my fee for service, my fee is X, and it's contingent on performance, not on mine, Mr. Buyer, because I'm going to perform for you. I am going to put my best foot forward to get your American dream of homeownership figured out. The performance is on your ability, Mr. Buyer, to perform all the way to the closing table, and you bring those funds that I will then take my fee to. So I don't want you, as a buying member of the public here, to be afraid to go look at any home, because me, as the licensed competent professional in the transaction, will seek my fee for service through the negotiation of your contract, independent of what the situation will and may be for each individual home. We're empowered to go out and shop and look and find you that right home, and we will put the purchase puzzle together with the other side of the transaction to fulfill your goals. Did I hit it all there on that page 2, or what?
Yeah, excellent job.
So the page 3, this is, it probably shouldn't be described this way, but I describe it as the boilerplate page. This is very mirror to what you're going to see in the 220 exclusive right to sell listing agreement, where you describe your protection period. How many days after the expiration of this offer or of this contract will the buyer have that this contract still states that you stay in hold. That's a fill in the blank. That's a discussion that honestly your broker in charge should set that number through office policy. That's where you would consider, what the term is on page 1, what the protection period needs to have some correspondence to that situation, individual to the needs of that client. It's important again to know that this is only 3 pages, and it's very quick to get through, and I didn't get into full detail on every single piece of the boilerplate, but you should be able to get through this in a way that helps them understand their biggest fears are going to be around the obligation of owing the fee for service. You handle that very succinctly on page 2, and it's not fully executed unless everybody signs it. So filling out the form in its entirety, giving the client a copy of that form when you're done so they have a record of it. All that's important professional diligence to exercise as a buyer agent.
Super. And while I've got you here as a practitioner, because, on the hotline, I get questions about this form. I'm kind of interested, section 1's pretty easy. That's, the buyer's the buyer, the broker's the broker. Section 2, when you're talking to a consumer, what are some ways that you interview them to come up with section 2 to try to pull out the information you need from the buyer, what their desires are in terms of the property, location? What's kind of your modus operandi for when you interview a consumer, a buyer, to get this section 2 filled out?
That's a great question. That's a basic discovery situation that every licensee that's working with a buyer should be asking those questions. What are your goals? What's important to you? Within the market that I serve, where do you prefer to shop? What criteria are necessary for you to make the purchase to meet your goals? Fact-finding that information becomes very important so that you can fill out the purpose of agency correctly. I'll give you an example. Buyers that come to me for my services, I serve Lake Keowee, oftentimes are looking at the residential homes that are listed for sale, and they exhaust those options, and they need to look at land. They need to look at land and new construction, custom construction options. So in my situation, if we start with a residential exclusive right to buy by our agency contract, we may end up switching over to a land as the purpose of agency, the checkbox using vacant land and describing that. The important part is there are different fees for service for those two different offerings of my service. So residential may be at a rate of X, land may be at a rate of X, whatever those two different things are. If you're changing the scope of service, then you may want to look at using different buyer agency contracts to service the same client if the purpose of agency is wholly and totally different. Do you agree with that kind of sentiment, especially if the fee is different?
Yeah, definitely, because we get that on the hotline where realtors have set a fee in their buyer agency agreement. Under the settlement, the safe answer is to stay at that fee or go lower, but the settlement also allows if the scope of work changes, which could be you're switching, like you were talking about, going from a residential lakefront to hunting vacant land for construction. There's different risks, different workloads, different scope of work, and you could increase your fee in that scenario or keep it the same or even lower it. So I agree with that, definitely.
Well, and if you know that scope of service up front, I'll give you an example beyond the one I just gave you. I've got a client or a member of the public that wants to become a client that's going to move to Lake Kiowee. We're moving the whole family here, but we also need to move our business. And our business is going to require a real property transaction. And that business is going to be a commercial scope of service through the buyer agency agreement. I would not try to cram all that down into one buyer agency agreement. I would write the agreement for purpose of agency, checkbox residential, general description, Lake Kiowee waterfront, approximate price, whatever the price range that they're shopping in with a little bit broader scope so I'm prepared when something reduces into their price range. General locations, Oconee and Pickens County, those are the only two options to still be Lake Kiowee waterfront, and any other preferred terms. I'd make that its own. As Diana Brothers says, the four walls of the contract, that scope of service in that one buyer agreement, and then whatever the requirements of the business real estate transaction, I'd write that into another buyer agency agreement. And that's two different agreements, and they don't run in conflict because it's two different scopes of service. But for our commercial business, we need warehouse space that's located within 10 minutes of an exit off of I-85 and whatever the purpose of agency, that scope of service, what it would be. And if the fee for service is different, then you've got the opportunity to settle that up front. There's never any problem with reducing your fee. You're never going to get sued for making less money. So if in a situation you do end up reducing your fee before you get to the closing table, I'm asked a lot of times, do I need to write a new buyer agency agreement? I would not write one myself. I would just simply reduce my fee and move right along. But if you're going to try and make a decision where you're going to earn more money and you've already made an agreement to earn less money, you better have a definable reason as to why that's changing. And the way that I instruct is, in that transaction, if that buyer were to become upset to the point they complain to the real estate commission about something that took place in that transaction, if you were to go before the members of the real estate commission and explain why you were paid more money or were asked for more money or popularly paid a bonus, can you explain to the real estate commission why that more money situation was in the best interest of your client? If you can't verbalize it to them, you may have written your last deal. There's no additional fee, additional bonus that's worth it being your last transaction. If we can think with that mindset, we stay safe.
Fantastic. Yeah, I totally agree. And then, like we were talking about in section 2, you probably have like a script, right? Especially if you're
Sure.
a new agent, you want to practice, you want to get this smooth and practice with other people in your office, practice with your broker in charge, your other team members, and get it smooth so that you know how to talk when you're sitting at the kitchen table or on a Zoom with a client. And then section 4 talks about the broker's efforts on here. That's the one thing I learned in your class, like you were talking about. When you're customer service, you're just giving kind of a base level. Mm-hmm. And then this is going into a higher level of service in this section 4. So how do you explain that to a consumer about, as agent, what you can what more services you can offer me when you're my buyer agent instead of just I'm in a customer status. I'm now a buyer client.
So that kind of upstep in the service, and transaction-based services, customer-based services are still considered a service that has a fee-for-service involved with it. Client-level service is just simply different service. And what I explain to the participants in my class and the members of the public that come to me for buyer agency services is very simple. I know what you can't Google. I know what you never thought to Google. I know what ChatGPT gave you an answer to that was wrong. I have a value as the licensed practitioner in this transaction that is the expert in the very thing that you are looking for. What you're going to get from me is advocacy. I'm going to advocate for you in this transaction to get your best positioning to make the purchase of the property and get it to closing. I'm going to be looking out for those pitfalls that you never thought to look out for. I'll give you an example. I'm pending on a waterfront home on Kiowee that has a covered dock in place. I walked all over that dock. There is not a license plate on the back of it with the 4-digit number from Duke Energy indicating that this dock is permitted. We assume it's permitted, but we don't know if it's permitted unless Duke Energy tells us that it's permitted. I talk with the listing agent. Do you have a permit for this dock? Does the current seller have any information? Did they transfer the dock into their name? Sure enough, they never transferred the dock into their name. That's a risk piece that I've mitigated for these buyers because I know and understand my marketplace that we need to know that the dock sitting in place is what Duke Energy said was permitted for this tax map number. And so we're able to put together through due diligence a resolution to that situation. But had they had no representation in this transaction, had they had just went at it as a customer without a buyer agent leading them through, they may have never known this pitfall that could have cost them money down the road. It could be the wrong dock. They could have taken out trees along the shoreline that are required to be there because they were there before, a number of things. So explaining to the member of the public, the advocacy piece is what they say matters to them the most. In all of our NAR surveys, what do they want from us? They want your knowledge base. They want your ability to look out for them and know what to do and when to do it. They have a playbook in their 310 contract for sale that says these are dates when things will be due by, but they don't know what that means. They need a licensed, competent professional to take them through to closing. And the data that we have from NAR when they're through the purchase process, they say that you guys are invaluable. They could not have made the purchase without them. They could not have handled the stress. There was even a for sale by owner study where more than 50% of for sale by owner situations led to the actual seller being in tears over the process. In tears. That tell you how important we are in the transaction. And having a buyer have that advocate to take them through to closing, it has a value. Listing agents and sellers also need to understand that value. 88%, according to our 2025 NAR Home Buyers and Sellers Survey, 88% of buyers have representation in the transaction. So what does that mean? That means about 88% of the time, you can consider as a seller that a buyer coming to the property is going to need to compensate their representation. So as listing agents, we need to be talking about that, and we'll catch that in another video. But and we're doing this for the buyer agency contract, and we'll do another one for the listing agency, but we've got to think more holistically and globally in the transaction, how the puzzle pieces come together. It's not A plus B equals C every time. We're taking the jigsaw puzzle of real estate and throwing it on the table. The pieces are everywhere. The two licensed competent professionals are the ones that have to put those pieces together that form what will ultimately be the settlement statement, the deed, the conveyance of this property, and all goals met for each parties, which are always different. Seller needs to sell, buyer needs to buy, so you don't have to be adversarial in the piecing together of that jigsaw puzzle.
Excellent, well said. The next section, section 5, talks about, and from a lawyer, I know like dual and designated, but what I'm interested from your point of view as a practitioner, I know you have listings, you have seller clients, your brokerage has listings and seller
Sure.
clients, and and conversely, you have buyer clients. How do you talk, when you talk to a consumer about dual and designated agency, and in your classes, what are some ways that you explain dual and designated to a consumer?
If you've ever been in my classroom, you've seen me do the hand thing for dual and designated, and that's kind of the best way I explain it to consumers as well, and I'll take you through that exercise. But the explanation I give to the public is understand that at Lake Huey Real Estate, we have listings. My broker in charge, he lists exclusively all of the developer inventory. He doesn't tend to list many other things. He's a non-competing broker in most scenarios. But if we run across inventory that I personally have listed, or my broker in charge has listed, this acknowledgement says that you will consider those listings, and before we enter into a 310 contract for sale or begin that negotiation process, that there will be another agreement presented to you, that you understand that there's an existing relationship here, that you understand that the broker in charge, the broker owner, you are actually a client of the broker in charge. We get out there in the streets and go, my client, my client, my... You are the designated agent with that client. The client belongs to the BIC. The fee is set by the BIC. So when we're saying my fee, it is a fee of the brokerage, bringing it up to a higher level so members of the public can understand, and taking it off of you're in charge of the driver's seat here of this. No, they need to understand the full scope of the agency situation. So explaining to them that there may be an opportunity, Mr. Buyer, where my broker in charge, of whom you are a client officially of, me as your designated agent, as a buyer agent, I may have a listing, or in a designated agency agreement situation, which is at the top of page 2, if you've got your forms out and following along at home, a member of my firm, one of my co-workers within this building, because we're all confined in one building here, they may have a listing that you may become interested in. The important thing that you understand, Mr. Buyer, is that there are pre-existing agency relationships. There are listing agreements with other clients represented by this firm. This consent is the consent that you'll consider them, not that you will agree that to this specific relationship, which is dual or designated, that you will make that consideration and understand you will see another agreement, and that also the listings that I'm describing, that may be my BICs, mine, or another licensee of the firm, that client also has to agree to that relationship. So there'll be another agreement. What I generally tend to say is, Mr. Buyer, I want you to consider all property that fits the scope of what you are looking for, and that may be inclusive of listings that are in-house at Lake Huey Real Estate. Your acknowledgement says you're willing to consider these. I won't push these above others. This is a disclosure because agency relationships exist. Now, the hand, I mentioned a hand demonstration, and I use this to describe this really in the core class and many of the other classes where we cover agency. If you think of the firm as a hand, this is the real estate firm. The BIC is always the palm. We'll say me as the individual practitioner, I'm the thumb, and we've got other licensees of the firm. Here are my fingers. Everything's connected to the palm. So if you are coming through the palm to get to the other finger, there's a special relationship there. If a buyer comes to me as the listing agent, you already have a relationship there that you have to contend with. If the buyer that you have is buying a listing that your broker has, you have a relationship here. If your partner in your building across the hall from you has a listing and you have a buyer, the relationship exists through the palm. When does it change? When the palm is not connected, these fingers over here, so a firm across the street has a listing and you have a buyer, you're not connected anymore. You've got your own palm here. And the confusion happens when we have franchise with this BIC, franchise with that BIC, and the licensee does not understand that you've got two different BICs here. Or even more confusing is when you have one BIC that's covering a broad scope of a lot of licensees. They're failing to recognize that even though the licensee they may be transacting with that has a listing in Spartanburg, you're representing a buyer and your office is in Seneca, you still have dual agency. You still own the same palm, still have the same BIC, same broker in charge, even though these fingers are as far apart as they can go, if that makes sense from an analogy perspective.
Yeah, I like that. So say like with your two hands, almost like a thumb war.
Yeah.
You're both you're fighting for you're advocating for your client, trying to get the best deal. I like that.
That's right. And the hand is the relationship. The hand is the symbol for that agency relationship. Each palm being their own agency relationship. If you're within your hand, you have an additional obligation of an additional agreement, either dual or designated, depending on what situation you may be in. That's a long form of what this is. But and let's face it, members of the public, they don't understand agency laws, and many practitioners also struggle with understanding what agency roles are and explaining that. That's an easy tool to help a member of the public understand that if you're going to look at anything listed through this hand, there'll be a second agreement. If you're going to look at anything outside and hand over here, foot, whatever, we don't need an extra agreement because there's no relationship. We're all related through the palm of this one hand.
Super. And if I'm a buyer client of yours and I'm like, hey, I want you to fight for me, even if your brokerage has the listing. If your brokerage offers designated agency, can I talk about how that kind of frees you up to advocate for me as the buyer client when you're in designated instead of dual agency?
Yeah, dual agency, of course, it strips away some of that ability to fight. Well, it strips away all the ability to advocate and bulldog for the lowest and best, because you've got, or highest and best, whichever side you're representing. You lose those services that are offered through full client level services. Designated is basically a good way to describe it, where your broker can designate this agent and that agent to serve these two separate clients that may be or that will be transacting together. It gives them the key to this is though truly staying designated. Don't overstep and come into talking about things that may be the goals of either the buyer or the seller, depending on who you represent. You need to think about like serving on a jury and being sequestered. You don't speak to each other. You stay designated to the clients that you're serving in that transaction, so it can be closer to just basic agency.
Super. Yeah, definitely. Section 6 on the hotline, I get a lot of, the term I use is like a villain buyer, and maybe they do it by accident. They didn't know they weren't supposed to do something, or maybe they are a villain and they go outside and go go look at new construction on their own, or a FSBO on their own, or go sign a buyer agency agreement. So Section 6, when you're talking to a consumer, I say on the hotline to scare the buyer straight a little bit, but maybe that's a little bit too scary. But how do you tell the buyer, hey, look, you're in an exclusive right to buy with me. You can't go do all this stuff on your own.
Yeah, but I guess versus scaring the buyer straight, inform the buyer fully of that when we are signing this contract, Mr. Buyer, this is an obligation. This is a commitment that we are making to each other. That exclusivity is not just me to you, it's you to me. One easy hot tip that's not hard to do, hand them a stack of your business cards and say, hey, you were, and even you can have a special business card that says represented by Reah Smith at Lake Huey Real Estate. Mr. Buyer, you're working exclusively with me. All real estate needs need to flow through me, start with me, and we'll build plans from there. In the rare opportunity that you are approached by a member of the public that says, hey, I know you're looking to buy a house, and we'll say you're at the softball field watching the kids play softball together, and one of the other parents comes up and says, I heard you were looking to buy a house, we might be selling mine. That's an opportunity you can hand them my business card and say, that's awesome. I'm represented by Reah, and if you'll give her a call, we'll be able to see if this is something that will work. But all of my real estate needs are, I'm actually represented in the transaction, and all of my real estate needs are handled by the professional, and her name is Reah Smith. So give them that opportunity to have something to explain. They don't understand oftentimes their representation enough to re-explain it to someone else, to a member of the public. And if you find yourself just completely irresistible to walking into an open house as a buyer, I've got to see this house because we were, honey, stop the car. There's a sign that says open house and we got to go in it. If they've got a business card with your name on it, it gives them the opportunity to, with that listing agent or the designated agent of the firm, it gives them an opportunity to say, hey, I'm represented as a buyer by Reah Lake Huey Real Estate, but I'd like to tour this open house. It gives them some freedom to where they can do that, and they understand that obligation that they are represented by you, and that what that exclusivity is, and that they're going to exclusively come through you. Explain to them a pitfall could exist where you just get too excited and you give away confidential information that should not be given away. Now, if you were in an open house and you disclose something confidential like, oh, wow, this is the most amazing home I've ever seen, I would pay $100,000 more than ask. The licensed competent professional that is the listing agent in that situation still owes you limited confidentiality, but it's best to never let that type of information out. Now, let's say you walk into a for sale by owner without me and you say that same exact statement. That member of the public doesn't owe you anything. That member of the public may use that against you in a negotiation. I am your shield to keep you safe in the transaction so that you can be in the most advantageous positioning to make the type of purchase you're looking to make. If you throw yourself out there and start talking and saying things, you've given away some, probably inadvertently, never on purpose. Generally, does anybody want to self-harm their negotiation point? But what you're saying, you may not realize, becomes interpreted in a different sort of way and hurt you in a negotiation down the road. So it's best to work always through me and always contact me. And then again, you're in a relationship through this contract. You need to be available to your buyer client. If they're calling you and you're not calling them back, that's a problem. You've owed them in the old car obedience to what that doesn't mean you're available 24/7, but if they're making requests of you, you have the obligation of obedience. So answer your phone, return text messages, return emails, and communicate.
That's a good point. I never thought about the seller, like a FSBO hearing, this is my dream house, I would pay 100 over list, or even now with surveillance systems.
Surveillance is certainly there. And I do believe we have that covered we have it in section 13 on page 3, surveillance. Buyers advise that properties they enter may have audio and video surveillance. I tell every single buyer before we ever get out of my car, or if they're meeting me at a property, and if that's the case, they've been vetted, forewarned. If you're not using forewarn, you need to forewarn them. And we've got some type of relationship already. I explain to them, like, you never need to feel like you're not being surveilled anywhere on planet Earth in 2026. Whatever you say could be overheard and then could be misconstrued, or could be used against you in a negotiation. It is best that you bring along a note-taking device or a pen or a pencil, and as you have some specific questions that get into more of the meat and potatoes of possible negotiation. Not, does this house have 3 or 4 bedrooms? Not that stuff that's discoverable is okay, but if you start talking about things that could hurt yourself, it could be overheard in the listing that you're in. Again, the licensed competent professional has an obligation of confidentiality, limited confidentiality. It's like Wu-Tang is forever. You have limited confidentiality, but that member of the public does not owe you that confidentiality. So it's best to have the buyer beware mentality if we don't get out and slip out things that may hurt us down the road if this were to become the house that you're going to ultimately offer on.
Yeah, excellent point. Because I haven't even heard on the hotline, not just giving away it's my dream house, I'd pay more than last. Making some offhanded comment about the decor that insults the seller, and they hold that against
That's
you.
more common, where you get in here and go, I can't believe they've got this wallpaper with monkeys and bananas and jungle theme all over it. which for some reason is common in like half baths. It seems I've seen that in a lot of different half baths. I can't believe they have that. The sellers are personally offended, and you've already started the negotiation from a weird point where they think, well, they don't even like my house. Why would I even make a provision to give them anything in this offer? It's best to just keep those loose lips from sinking ships.
Exactly. And a lot of times on the hotline, going back to this section 6, they'll say, Byron, so this buyer agreement doesn't mean anything. Buyers can just willy-nilly do whatever they want. And I tell them, look, at the end of the day, you can sue them for breach of this agreement. I know suing your client, there's pros and cons to everything, but this agreement is a legal agreement. And if a buyer is a villain and breaches this, you can take legal action against the buyer. So I bring that up as well.
Well, and it's important, and we talked about it in another video, that you do have the disclosure of brokerage relationships forms, Form 110. If you need to have the ability to build that trust and build that understanding before you have the commitment, you can go on a date with the 110. You get engaged with the buyer agency contract. Now, you get married when they buy the house, right? That's the analogy there. So you've got two different tools for offering service at a customer level and then a client level as well. It's important. We get in this if this, then that mentality in the way we practice real estate. Let that go. Get in the mindset of what is the need of this consumer, whichever side they're on. We're talking buyers. What is the need of this buyer in this transaction? And what is the best tool that I have in my form's wheelhouse to serve them at the particular point they're in their buying journey? And their journey may be, with me, just seeing Lake Kiowee and realizing it is too far from where their grandkids live. What have you. That gives you the tool of, if I've put them in a buyer agency contract, I've agreed to serve them. And at that point, there's nothing to serve. If they've decided this doesn't work for them, and you can terminate the agreement, but why go to there until you've decided that they have learned your market enough, until you've built that trust? And I use the word trust. You do have to throw out trust to the public that they're going to work with you. I believe in my abilities as a buyer agent. I've been doing it a very long time. It's my preferred practice. Even though I do list, I believe in my abilities as a buyer agent that if they are true buyers of my marketplace, they will want to work with me. And I will showcase those abilities through using the disclosure of brokerage relationships and basic customer service levels. And so when we're in that situation where they're still at customer service and they start asking me those client level questions, as we talked about, brokerage efforts on Section 4, when they start asking me, if I want to make this purchase, what strategies would you come up with for a negotiation? Mr. Buyer, that's a great question. That's a question that I can answer through client level services. Client level services come to you through an exclusive right to buy buyer agency contract. If you'd like to talk about buyer agency service, then let's have a discussion about it and move from there.
Fantastic. And you talked about the most important part on the hotline when they call is their broker fee. The settlement took firm-to-firm compensation away from the MLS as part of the settlement. And then we did a risk management of what's the risk going forward from trial lawyers, from United States Department of Justice. And the feedback we're getting and we're seeing across the country is the broker-to-broker compensation is a risk. And so these forms have moved away, our SCR forms have moved away from firm-to-firm compensation. And the broker fee, under the settlement, you have to have a clear broker fee. But can we do a deep dive kind of into Section 7? Because there's different subsections of Section 7.
Yeah, Section 7 is, the real meat and potatoes of this contract. This is what the buyer client's really going to want to know and understand. What is it going to cost me to work with you? So explaining the broker fee in Section 7, it could not be more clear. Initial only one, all caps, bolded, underlined. What does that mean? You pick one. You don't do a little bit of this and a little bit of that. It's either percentage of gross price or exactly blank flat fee or something else. I will work for you if you give me your lawnmower or whatever. I'll work for you if you do this or that. Whatever that other is, that's still definable and considered compensation. It has to be defined. It cannot be, I cannot stress that enough. If you're the type of buyer agent that is executing this without filling out this Section 7, you're at crazy extreme risk in practicing. You don't put them in the car and go show them stuff and say, hey, I'll call buyer or I'll call listing agents and see if they've talked with their sellers about what they maybe would be willing to offer in compensation, and then we'll decide what it is later. That's wrong. That's wrong in terms of it violates the settlement. It is wrong in terms of 4057, your license law. This must be defined up front, agreed up front. Know your fee, speak your value to your fee, and then forget it. Don't worry about it. Worry about finding the right home, then start to put the puzzle pieces together. I will tell you that when I am representing buyers in a buyer agency contract, and I'm going to show 7 homes this weekend, this Friday and Saturday. I've not called a single one of them yet. We are actually going to start by working with the disclosure of brokerage relationships to get into the homes. We will move probably into buyer agency on this trip because it appears that we are going to be in a buying trip versus a discovery trip. I will have discussions with this buyer about what my fee for service is. But as we are going around and looking at the listed property, as I start identifying ones that may become the property that they want to make a purchase on, number one, I'm going to put them in buyer agency agreement right then and there, and they'll understand the fee and I'll have the fee. Number two, as I start making discovery about these potential listings that may be maybe what they want to offer on, some of the conversations that I have with the listing agent beyond extra things I need to know, like, is something specific about the neighborhood or something from the seller's disclosure that I want clarification on. The next thing I tend to say to a listing agent is, hey, Mr. Listing Agent, we love your listing. I think they're going to offer. I'm not totally sure. I want to give you a little upfront information that I think will help us in the negotiation strategy. I have a buyer agency agreement executed with this buyer at a rate of fee for service for X. So understand that when we make you an offer, I will be writing on the 310 contract for sale in section 26. I will check the box, the 120 compensation agreement. You will see my fee for service at a rate of X, so that you're not surprised about what I am working for and that my client has agreed to compensate me through the transaction for my fees for service. I would appreciate, Mr. Listing Agent, professional, that you help advise your seller client that fee for service has been contractually agreed upon, and I would appreciate if you negotiate with me using the contract price to meet the appropriate net needs of your seller client or any other terms that work for your client. And don't put me in a situation where we're having to look at different negotiating strategies solely based on my fee. Mr. Listing Agent, I would never want you to have to look at changing your fees, just as I hope you would never want me to have to change my fees when we simply can work this out through the negotiation using the funds that my buyer will be bringing to the table to solve your seller's obligations. I set that tone with a listing agent so they're not surprised by what the fee is or isn't. And that gets them thinking about how to advise their seller client on the only place that the money is coming from to sell their house. It puts, again, the jigsaw, throw the pieces on the table. It helps them know what some of those pieces look like so we can start putting it together to get towards a successful closing.
Yeah, I like how you put that, because on the hotline, I'll get calls where buyer agents that are kind of new, they've been busy, they haven't dug into what happens when firm to firm goes away. They'll call me on the hotline and go, Byron, I can't talk to the seller directly because they're listed. How do I do this? And what you just explained was perfect.
It's important that you have those. If we get so lackadaisical about picking up the phone, pick up the phone and call that listing agent and give them that presentation, just like I threw out of this is the obligatory fee for service, as in my buyer has agreed to this up front. They intend to seek that fee using the proceeds that they bring to the table. They intend to seek that fee through those proceeds. There won't be an opportunity for additional monies outside this fee. I'm not suggesting, Mr. Listing Agent, that you advise your client in any way other than what is best for them. But we know, as the competent professionals in this transaction, there's only one amount of money that goes to the bank with you. It's not the contract price. It is net proceeds to seller. Listing agents need to advise sellers on that very thing, that independent of what, and they need to advise that buyer agency fees are not set as a standard. They never were. It's a media misconception that bloomed out of the settlement situation. Individual buyer agents, individual firms have set their individual fees for service. Sellers need to understand that those fees are contracts. Listing agents need to advise their seller clients that while you may negotiate on how much you're willing to allow a buyer to use of their funds to go towards compensating their representation, at no point can a seller renegotiate that fee that was set by the buyer agent and their buyer that was agreed upon. When we say that all commissions are negotiable, they are. Mr. Seller, understand that that fee for service has been negotiated. It was negotiated between that buyer client and their representation, and it has been agreed upon. So our ability to negotiate exists in 310 and the terms of this contract. The best place to pull your net number from is going to be the contract price. We need to move this mindset along that a seller is going to renegotiate a buyer agent fee. Seller is not party to that buyer agency agreement. If the seller wants a buyer to successfully come through their transaction and ultimately buy their house, we know that 88% of the time they're going to have a licensed, competent professional that brings them through that transaction, and they work for money like the rest of us do. That is the way we earn a living, and we need to be proud of it. Proud of our fees and be worth our fees. And listing agents, as those licensed, competent professionals, they need to explain that in detail to the seller what this situation is. I'll tell you that I don't feel like, and we'll talk about this in our listing agreement presentation, listing agents for eons never gave them a robust, meaningful discussion on agency, so they don't understand that what an exclusive right to buy buyer agency contract looks like for the adversarial side, and what those obligations and expectations are. And the sellers need to understand that. Listing agents need to explain that at substantive contact, that there are going to be agency relationships come to this transaction, and we need to be prepared of how we are going to position you to have your best outcome in these market conditions. I don't say highest and best, your most advantageous outcome for the conditions of your home and the market in which you're selling in. How can we plan for that, knowing that there is a range of fee for service out there? The way we prepare for that is to negotiate for the best net. We price in mind for what we need to price at to negotiate and still cover those fees. Price in mind for market conditions, price in mind for appraisal. That's a lot of things, right? That's a lot of moving parts. But you're the licensed, competent professional in the transaction, so you're charged with helping them figure that out.
I like that. Yeah, the seller could use the counter offer to try to adjust their net depending on what all the costs.
Of course, when they're countering back, and I advise that to the listing agent. Mr. Listing Agent, you're going to receive an offer from me. These are the terms. You'll get this. You better put every offer in writing. I have to harp on this in the classroom. You're going to get this offer 310 contract from me and the 120 as an attachment. I appreciate that if there are things about this offer that could be changed that you'd like to present back to me, please do. And understand that if your seller has net needs, figure it out in the contract price, because there's only one pot of money that's coming to solve everybody's obligations.
Fantastic. Yeah, and you talked about different business models. Different brokers have different business models and pricing. And then, so we've added this additional fee section to help with different business models. When you're talking in your classes to buyer agents, what do you say about bonuses when you're talking to them about the bonus section?
I tell them that bonuses, a bonus better be worth it possibly being your last transaction. Now that's very dark, right? That's very scary in the way that I put it. A bonus must be agreed upon up front. You cannot take a buyer, what is common, into a new construction community and then discover that they're offering you X $1,000 bonus. That has to be agreed upon up front. If they are offering you X $1,000 bonus and it's not in the four walls of this contract, it ain't your bonus. You cannot take it. Now, if you know and are planning for some level of bonus because those incentives are out there and you want to make a plan for that and you want your buyer to agree to that and you explain why you feel you are owed this bonus and they do agree to it, it still cannot be more than what the agreed upon dollar amount is. Now, I will say this about bonuses. The money comes from one direction, as we have been discussing at length here. It comes from the buyer to solve everybody's obligations. If you receive this bonus and you have to go in front of the real estate commission and explain why you did, it better be explainable why you accepted this bonus, under what premise was this good for the client that you represent. The real estate commission is charged with protecting the public, and that is a protection of the public. So in a situation, let's do something real life here. We take you've got your buyer agency fee is set. Your client has agreed to allow you to receive a bonus were there one offered, and it's been acknowledged and disclosed on page 2 of this contract. And you discover there's an X $1,000 bonus that's being offered. What are some options that can happen next? You can go to that buyer and say, Mr. Buyer, this builder seller or this seller is offering X in bonus money to me, the real estate professional in this transaction. And you have agreed already that I'm able to receive that. Now, before we go any further, looking at the situation of this negotiation, this contract, and this property, is there some way that this bonus could be more advantageous to you? Could you get a hardwood floor upgrade? Could we pay down points? Could we use it for your closing cost? Nope, all that is met by this builder. The builder has given me hardwood floors. I'm already getting the rate I prefer. The closing costs are included. All that being said, if you've exhausted all the ways at which this could help your buyer and you've got a written documentation of this type of conversation, send it out in an email, have them acknowledge back. That's the most covered way that I could see in which receiving a bonus would be somewhere acceptable, as if the buyer's needs were already met and it still gives me the ick. Okay, I work for a fee-for-service. That bonus section on every one of my buyer agency agreements is blank. I don't pursue my fees that way. So it is a buyer agent beware situation where one set bonus, don't let it be your last transaction.
Yeah, good points, because on the hotline, I point out that says if there's no bonus offered, then this doesn't apply, obviously.
Correct.
So that some buyers are scared by that, thinking you're just getting extra money, and you don't want to be accused of steering or even have evidence of steering because of the bonus. So
the steering part is very, very challenging to overcome. If they're looking at 3 different homes and the home that was selected was the one that offered the buyer agent bonus, better be able to explain why they chose that home, and it better not be because you got more money for doing it. When a builder is offering a bonus, why are they offering that bonus to you? Everybody needs to think about who they serve in the transaction. You are serving this buyer. The builder is offering you that bonus in an attempt to get you to sell their home over another one. Your loyalty, your obedience, the old in the old car is to your buyer, not that builder. And just because somebody waved more money at you, you better be able to explain why that was in the best interest of your client in pursuing that route. Now, I recognize that there are challenges in new construction and where a builder developer does not want to discount a contract price for any reason whatsoever. They don't want to set a comp that upsets the other comps in their new development. So they do offer a lot of incentives. That makes it challenging, right? As a licensee in the transaction representing a buyer, it makes it challenging to write out what that fee is going to be. Knowing more upfront about the situations of new construction neighborhoods is very important. And especially if, which it doesn't feel this way in the marketplace right now, if there's a point where things slow down and a builder is really having to incentivize buyer agents to come sell their properties, then that's where you really end up in a lot of different bonusing structure that becomes challenging to apply to the buyer agency contract. One thing that I would consider if you are working that, the national builder inventory is, what's your purpose of agency? Is your buyer client looking at resale homes on 123 Main Street that are 25 to 30 years old and new construction? They're not really the same thing. They're a little bit apples to oranges, just in the same real estate fruit basket. Look at your purpose of agency and make sure that you've got the correct buyer agency agreement signed for that client. And if there are two different purposes of agency, maybe you have two different buyer agency contracts.
Good point. And on the hotline, a lot of times we'll get the question from the buyer agents like, hey, Byron, how do I know that number to put in there? And what I say is, because you can always go down, your marketplace, pick a number you're comfortable with that you could reduce, but you can never go up.
And talk to your broker in charge. Yeah. We talk about my fee, my fee, my fee. When you say to the member of the public, my fee is X, well, what do they see? They see when that commission check is cut at the closing table that you got all of it. It was my fee. Change your lingo on that. Our fee for service at Lake Kiwi Real Estate to work with a buyer is X. That fee is set by the firm, dictated by the broker in charge. Take you out of the my fee zone and put it back into where it actually belongs in agency, which is with the firm. It helps the buyer to understand that from the settlement statement, that check that's going to be cut, even if you're on a 100% commission split model, you still have cost of business to consider with your firm. There's no reason to internalize that you are the sole setter of that fee. It is a firm fee from the brokerage, and help that buyer to understand more holistically the way that your business is even structured, because we've got to treat this transaction like what it is, a complicated, complex, legal transaction, and we got to stop treating it like we're selling a old deep freezer on Facebook Marketplace. We've got to practice with a little more diligence than that and explain these legal forms to the members of the public who are becoming our clients, so they are educated and they know and they understand what they're signing. Otherwise, there's a question of consent. Do they have informed consent to sign this document? You've got to give them that meaningful discussion.
Great points. And then different business models. The next one, retainer fee. On the hotline, I don't get a lot of hotline calls, but I can explain this. If you were taking some money up front for some reason, you could either, that's going to go into your brokerage pocket, or it might be credited against your ultimate fee at closing. What do you say on retainer fees in your classes?
Retainer fee and administration fee. And I'll tell you what, for admin fee, what my mentor instructor says. She calls it a junk fee. But it is an option of taking additional fees outside the broker fee for service. A retainer fee could be, if filled in here, due and payable upon the signing of this contract. You can credit it, or it can be that it is just owed to you up front. That gives you the option to receive some level of fee up front for working with that buyer. You're still working on contingency, that contingent that this buyer actually close the sale and owe you the entire broker fee. It gives you that option to take funding up front and have that buyer put a financial skin in the game through that fee, and you can even credit it back to them. Hey, if you do make this purchase, then I'd like to credit back to you this amount that you have fronted me in good faith, that you credit back to me at closing this offering. And then the administrative fee, and there are a lot of firms that do charge administrative fees that can be due and credited in a number of different ways that are described on this form. When that administrative fee is to be paid, either right now or at closing, if that fee is to be credited. The important piece between retainer fee, administrative fees, bonuses even, if you are charging anything for your services, it has to be disclosed. It has to be agreed upon in writing. And this, for your Form 130, we know meets multiple levels of obligation that you have as a buyer agent licensee. It meets license law, it meets fair housing, it meets South Carolina contract law. You're safe in using this form, and that is a member benefit that you have as a member of the South Carolina Realtor Association, to have this form that's compliant without any question.
Yeah, great points. Yeah, on the administrative fee, kind of like you've talked about, be able to justify that if you're caught on the carpet. Show, like, say they were on a cruise and you were going to have to FedEx, you're going to have a bunch of FedEx, UPS charges, be able to document. So somebody, because that's the detractor, right? They might accuse it of being a junk fee, and you go, no, it's not a junk fee. Here's what I
Yeah,
charge
you better be able to explain why. If your broker fee for service, for me to service you as a buyer, is X, you better be able to explain why you need more money outside of X. And if it's legitimate, then wonderful. That's if you can explain it, and you could stand in front of the real estate commission and explain why this was done this way. That's always my litmus test, because you stand in front of that group down in Columbia and say, I did this for this reason, and this is why it was in best interest of the client that I was serving. Then you're generally speaking in compliance.
Super. Yeah, and then we touched on it, but the page 3, the boilerplate section, Section 8 talks about, because you might have other buyers competing for the same property, so this can make them aware of that, right?
Yeah, definitely. In a hot market, you know, especially there's certain price points on Kiowee that there are always buyers in. There's certain properties, if it's short-term rental friendly, there's always additional buyers in that field that are, you know, more heavily populated by buyers than others. So that's important to have that disclosure.
Yeah, and we even have a Form 140 you can use to double down on this to comply with license law and code of ethics. So just disclosure, basically disclosing, hey, I'm going to keep your information confidential, but there may be competing buyers that are working with me or my brokerage and going after a house. Yeah, good point about a hot market. Fair housing, realtors have a duty to make sure that the fair housing laws are complied with, and that includes the buyer too. The buyer's agreeing not to discriminate against the seller for.
Well, that's an interesting point to make, is that, you know, the members of the public don't understand that fair housing applies to all. It's not just the licensed, competent professionals in the transaction. You, Mr. Member of the public, as a listing, as a seller or a buyer, you are also duty bound by fair housing not to discriminate, and so we won't.
Yeah, good point. And then number 10, sex offender, criminal information. Kind of what I say on the hotline is, and you can go to this website and you can see where these offenders are. But realtors, I try to say realtors don't go in there and look at that. So no trial lawyer can ever say you had actual knowledge, you should have disclosed. But this is a way to let the buyer know, hey, if this is important to you, to know where there might be criminals or sex offenders, this is a website. You can contact the local sheriff and get more information. As a practitioner, what do you say on this section?
That's the perfect example of the way this form, you know, that outside of license law, this obviously meets license law compliance within 4057, what is required of you to have in a form. But Section 10 here, the sex offender criminal information section, that covers you under Megan's law. I don't remember the actual state statute. You probably know it as an attorney off your top of your head. This is the disclosure that you make to a buyer, and it's also on your listing agreement as well, that if this information is important to you, it will not come from me. You can go to this website and find this type of information. That precludes you from the responsibility of knowing an informational database that is not static. You know, it's changing. There are offenders that join that list later than when the agreement was signed. That's something that you would want the buyer to take care of in their own due diligence, and this is their disclosure to do so. Generally speaking, most of the buyers that I work with don't think twice about, they're Googling everything. So for them to think about and asking ChatGPT everything, and ChatGPT doesn't care if the answer is right or wrong, but that's, you know, they're already looking up and discovery what they can on the internet, and this is just another notice that they have the ability to do so here, and exactly where to go and do it for the correct information. Yeah,
good point about Megan's law, because post-closing, buyer finds out there's a sex offender a half mile away and tries to sue you, you're protected under this. So that was a good point to bring up.
Yes, you're protected using these forms.
And then 11's talking about your disclosure brokerage relationship. Reah did a great video on that. Please watch that.
And you've got the acknowledgement of that on page 1 too. The buyer acknowledges receiving an explanation. So you got double dip here on 4057 370, that requirement of the disclosure of brokerage relationship and a meaningful discussion on agency.
Super. And then 12, we've gotten calls from brokers that said their trial lawyers have said this has saved them. It basically says that unless somebody's doing gross negligence, they can't be sued for more than the amount of money in the transaction, and it brings up the wire fraud, cyber electronic fraud as well. So this is a protection for the brokerage built into this form.
Another member benefit.
Yep, these forms are designed for realtors to help you do business, but also to be successful, that limits your cost, your lawsuits. That's what we're doing here.
Liability protection is important if you want to do this for a long time.
Exactly. And you talked about surveillance. Be careful. Don't talk in the listing. Use written texting or a notepad. And 14 is another risk management tool where it says, look, I'm licensed as a real estate agent to market and sell real estate. I'm not an attorney. Even though you might have a good knowledge of all this stuff just from experience, you're not a licensed attorney. You're not a licensed tax advisor, lender, appraiser, surveyor, structural engineer, home inspector, other professional service provider.
Yeah, it's important to cover that section 14 about professional counsel. So you set the understanding of what your scope of agency is and what your expertise is and what your license says that you can do. And it gives you an opportunity to say, I have built a career here knowing the right folks that do this type of additional due diligence that you're going to need through the transaction. If you're going to work a 1031 exchange, I know the right providers for that. If you have a tax-based question for like a listing, you're going to make a large gain, I can give you a list of 3 certified public accountants that I depend on to answer this type of information. And most importantly, it's your opportunity to say, I'm not an attorney and I don't play one on TV, unless you actually are an attorney and you're on TV. I'm not going to give you legal advice. I'm going to give you real estate-based advice. And as it crosses the line into what would be considered legal advice, I'm going to advise you to seek counsel on that, either through your closing attorney or another attorney that's more proficient in the area that the issue may be in. But what you need to understand from me, Mr. Buyer, is I will stop shy of giving you legal advice, and I will tell you when you're asking me a question that really requires legal advice. And you need to know that so you know you're making confident decisions on the information as it's coming to you. So that's very important to set that line, because you don't want to end up in a UPL, right? An unlicensed practice of law. You have a real estate license and you are not an attorney.
That's a great segue to 15, because I get on the hotline. Hey, Byron, you guys gave us these blanks. I'm just going to fill in whatever I want to fill in here. So UPL, unauthorized practice of law. To limit that risk, on the hotline, I say, look, make sure your brokerage attorney or your closing attorney or the hotline's giving you approval on whatever language you're adding there. And if you need more space, you can see, attached addendum.
Right, exactly. I see it on offers that I receive, just either in buyers or sellers in negotiating. I see strange stuff get written in, and I go, what attorney wrote that? And a lot of times firms have in-house legal counsel that they can run by. We do not have in-house legal counsel, but we have a different team of lawyers that we lean on for specific situations as we need them. Don't go, think of this as like a coloring book where you color within the lines using the markers that you were given. Don't go find colored pencils then and start writing a bunch of stuff. Okay, stay in your practice zone and stay in what your license says you can do. Do not enter over into the legal zone. The acronym that Diana Brothers uses is CYA. CYA all day long. Call your attorney on these issues that are of legal matter.
Yeah, and attorneys love to help you with that because they're running businesses too, and it can save them headaches if they can get the documents remedied up front. So yeah, lean on your attorneys. And then some legalese. This entire binding, you've used the phrase 4 corners of the agreement. I love that.
4 walls of the contract. That's another Diana Brothers-ism. We are signing in the 4 walls of the contract, and everything exists inside the 4 walls of that agreement. That there's not a side handshake over here, and if there is, guess what? It's not enforceable. It needs to be within the 4 walls of that contract.
And then license law says any changes, you got to make the changes and initial and date them to be compliant. And it talks about how you amend this agreement, like if you were lowering your brokerage
Correct.
fee, how you could do that. And then the last page is some legalese. It's a legally binding agreement. Buyers need to talk to their attorneys if you don't understand what you're reading. You've gotten a copy of it. And then it triples down on the real estate brokerage relationship form to say that you got a copy of that. And then it's agreeing to communicate via this email address and phone number. And then the buyer properly executes. And then the broker, they may designate some of their associated licensees, empower them to sign for the brokerage. There's initials at the bottom of each page for everybody, says they've read the page. And then that bottom gray box is a new thing we've added to try to make sure only realtors are, you're a SCR member, you paying your dues, make sure if this is a member benefit, only you have access to it. So that bottom of the page, the vendors are going to pre-populate that with your name and phone number and email. That'll also help, especially on the contract for the other agent to have that information on there.
That's right.
As well.
It not only is it a member benefit, but it's a value for you as a practitioner to be able to offer these forms for use for your buyers and sellers in these transactions. They think they can go on LegalZoom and just print off a contract and be compliant, but we know because we vetted that these forms are in compliance with license law, fair housing, all the South Carolina statutes that affect a real estate transaction, disclosure, the South Carolina property disclosure laws. All these things are met within the four walls of our forms here. So that you can even point that out, that this is a benefit that I have. What would cost you billable hours with an attorney, I already have this form vetted and available to you through your service, agreement to service with me. I can get you through this contract. That we take for granted that these forms exist. Our buyers and sellers also take for granted that these forms exist. If you visualize a world where the realtor poof went away and is no longer in the transaction, who's left in the state of South Carolina to facilitate these things? Attorneys. Attorneys are going to charge a billable hour. And if you were negotiating only through attorneys each time, gracious alive, wouldn't it be a different fee for service if we were to suddenly disappear and it all had to be pulled together just by the legal teams at the end? And that's a value. That's a value point to speak on. For this signing page, I do think it's important to note that on page 1, the undersigned buyer blank, now buyer in quotations, engages the undersigned brokerage blank. That buyer needs to be the buyer. If you're in a situation where your buyer is like, I'm shopping for my first home, I'm very excited, and my grandma's gonna help me make this purchase, and we need Granny's involvement. Well, Granny may need to be a buyer on the buyer agency agreement. If you need to know who a party really is in the transaction. Same thing with a listing agreement, of course, but if you're working with it, and we bring back in the FinCEN, if you're working with partners in a corporation, understanding that the decision makers are the ones that, number one, go with the corporation, are the ones that are actually executing the agreement. Make sure that you have that filled out correctly. And as you said, your broker in charge can designate you to sign those forms, can designate you to sign this buyer agency agreement, a listing agreement, a 120 compensation agreement, that they can designate you to have that signing authority.
Yeah, that's a great point. Even with spouses, you want to get both of them on there.
Correct.
A lot of times, right?
If they're both purchasers on the contract, whoever's going on the deed needs to be on this buyer agency contract.
Yeah, and that was a good point about the value of these forms, because these forms are reviewed whenever case law changes, license law, statutes change. It goes through an annual vetting process with the forms committee, practitioners, and lawyers.
Bless them for the work that they do, because it is, I have served on forms, and it is challenging. And I don't think our members understand that they don't recognize. They think it's like, the almighty Oz up there. Right. Clicking out forms. No, this is a member-driven committee with practitioners from across the state that practice in different arenas. That a lot of times they're brokers in charge that oversee large firms, and they see tons of transactions. So they're considering the practical practice. And we're gracious and grateful that our legal team considers the legal pitfalls that we may come up with in practical practice. This is a marriage of both those worlds through that member benefit of forms, and the forms committee is the members behind it making it happen.
Yeah, thank you, Forms Committee, Executive Committee, Board of Directors, when you approve these things.
Exactly.
It's invaluable to us as lawyers because we can write the lawyer stuff, but you guys are like, that's not going to work in the real world. We need to make sure we refine that.
Right.
If I'm a realtor and I'm interested in learning more as an instructor, what are some course options I've
Well,
got for
I
you?
am glad you asked. I'm very excited to have some course offerings coming up in the coming calendar months. The first, I came up with a little class that I'm called Foolin' with Forms because it's on April Fool's Day. That's my first course offering coming up. That'll be in my own backyard in my own market in Oconee County, and we can give you links on how to sign up for this. I'll be with the Greater Greenwood Realtors on April the 8th. I'm looking at setting up this same forms course in the Greenville market on April 20th as well. And then my next 3 courses will be at the Western Upstate Association of Realtors on 4/22, May the 19th, and if you've just waited to the last minute, June 30th. I am your in-person instructor at Western Upstate for those 3 days, including that drop dead. You've got till June 30th to get your 10 hours in for your licensure renewal. Those 3 days at Western Upstate will be the 4-hour required core course, Legal Hot Tips, and then you'll get 2 hours of elective in the afternoon of a new course that I've just course authored called Strategies for Seller Direct Transactions. And the entire scope of that coursework is some of the scripting like you heard with me today for buyers. It's that same scripting for sellers and helping them understand and navigate the transaction. Now that broker-to-broker compensation has left the SCR forms, it gives you some tools of how to work with sellers to get their most appropriate net for the market conditions and the conditions of their home, and how to talk with your sellers about the obligations that buyers have from a buyer agency contract, and how to talk to one another. We think about scripting as it relates to the clients that we serve in the transaction, but we also talk to each other, right? We also have to put our own deals together. So how are you scripting in your own head, talking with a listing agent about what your fee may be? Listing agents talking back to buyer agents about how you're negotiating for net. These are all things that we're covering in this really cool 2-hour elective course.
Super. And if somebody, a local board or a brokerage wants to hire you as an instructor, how do they get in touch with you?
They can find me very easy. I'm easy to find on Google, on Facebook. I'm easy to get a hold of by phone. I don't mind to toss my phone number out there, 864-710-9547. But more than likely in the comments of this video, I'll drop my digital business card so that I'm actually, these are just the Realtor Association or member at large, licensee at large offerings that I've come up with, but I've actually got appointments with a lot of different firms to facilitate in-firm training, especially with some of these larger firms that have, over 100 licensees. I'm running forms classes for them and kind of tightening up where they may have hardship understanding certain specifics of license law, like dual and designated agency, like transaction brokerage, and how to use the transaction brokerage agreement to meet the requirement of the NAR settlement of a written agreement, which we will call a written acknowledgement in South Carolina. So I'm available for hire for individual firms as well.
Super. Thank you for being a special guest star today. If you have any questions, Realtor, contact the legal hotline, 803-772-5206. Thanks, Mike. Tila, thanks, Reah.
Wonderful. Have me back anytime.
Will do. Thank you.